Hello and welcome to Connect the World. I'm Lynda Kinkade, coming to you live from CNN's World Headquarters here in Atlanta, filling in for Becky Anderson. An American war hero, a lion of the Senate, a national treasure who spent his life serving his country and standing by his ideals. People across the United States and around the world are honoring John McCain, the Republican maverick who died of brain cancer. The New York Stock Exchange helped kick off a week of tributes this morning with a moment of silence. But at the White House, the flag is already flying high again after being temporarily lowered to half-staff. President Donald Trump tweeted brief condolences Saturday, but hasn't said one word of praise about his political opponent. Looking at Mr. Trump's Twitter feed today, which mentions Mexico, sports stars and his approval ratings, you might not even know the nation is in mourning. Well, President Trump is expected to make an announcement anytime now about trade, and we will speak about that when that happens. First, I want to bring in White House reporter Stephen Collinson in Washington. We're also joined by international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson in London. Good to have you both with us. I want to go first to Stephen about John McCain. The service obviously is set for his memorial service. Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush set to speak, but President Trump, the current sitting president, not even invited.
That's right, Lynda. The feud between Donald Trump and John McCain is continuing even after the Arizona senator's death. This goes back a long way, all the way to the 2016 campaign, when you remember that the president, the then candidate Trump, said that McCain wasn't a hero because he was captured in Vietnam. That was a moment when everyone thought that the Trump campaign would basically die because he was dishonoring such a national hero. In fact, it turned out to be one of the moments when we knew that politics had changed and that Trump could say things that most politicians couldn't get away with. You know, in Washington, like everything else, death is highly political. McCain has been planning his funeral over the last year since he was diagnosed with brain cancer, specifically to exclude the president. And I think a lot of the people that have been paying tribute to McCain, the politicians, the foreign leaders, are in on the game. You know, if you look at a lot of their tributes, there is a lot of implicit criticism of the president and the way he's conducted himself and what he stands for, and his distrust for institutions, in the praise that's been layered on McCain. They talk about his honor, how he looked to reach across partisan divides, how he conducted himself. So it's you know, as the initial period of mourning passes, we're getting into a very interesting political moment in the United States.
Yeah, we certainly I want to ask you more about that in just a moment, but first I want to go to Nick Robertson for the international reaction, because here in the US, Donald Trump aside, he is being praised on both sides of the political spectrum. And we're hearing from world leaders who also, many are singing his praises.
They are, and as Stephen says, I mean, the undertones of criticism of President Trump are writ large through it. And when you think about it, these are individual tweets that are being laid out by many, many different leaders from Australia, Colombia, the province of Kosovo, the Baltic states, Georgia, Ukraine, many of the European countries as well. So all these are being written by these leaders individually. They're not calling up each other to say, hey, what should we say? Yet there is this undertone of inherent, if you will, criticism of President Trump there. Think of what the German foreign minister said, Heiko Maas, saying that Senator McCain believed in the importance of the transatlantic alliance. Of course, this comes at a time when President Trump is hammering Germany over its payments, contributions towards NATO, the fundamentals of the transatlantic alliance. Theresa May talked of, in her condolences, talked of Senator McCain being a statesman, of being someone who put his duty before himself. You know, one can certainly see into that, the way that she was heavily, if you will, attacked by President Trump in the UK, you know, in her own backyard just a few months ago, last month, in fact. So I think, you know, across the board, we're seeing this framed by all those that came to regard Senator McCain esteem, in high esteem, as when they're layering this praise on him. Again, as Stephen says, you can get very clearly a message that there's a dislike of essentially who's in the White House now and the way he's handling the office.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to Stephen on that point. And just for our viewers, replay some of Donald Trump on the campaign trail talking about John McCain.
He hit me. He's not a war hero. He's a war hero. He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
We can see the flags now back flying high in above the White House that were lowered to half-staff briefly over the weekend. And Stephen, you know, we're reading these reports that the president rejected a statement that his team had drafted to praise John McCain as a hero.
Yeah, that's what we heard over the weekend. And what would normally happen, of course, in these situations is the president of the time, if a giant political figure dies, would issue a statement, may even find an occasion to come on camera and talk about that person's legacy, leading the nation, if you like, in marking such an important death and a moment of national mourning. Then you would certainly see the president deliver a eulogy at the service. I'm sort of reminded of the funeral of Ted Kennedy 9 years ago, the great Democratic senator and friend of John McCain. That was an equivalent coming together. President Obama at the time delivered the eulogy, but there were people from all across the political spectrum. It's going to be very striking on Saturday when this gathering of the political establishment takes place in Washington's National Cathedral to bid farewell to John McCain, that the President of the United States won't be there and won't be sort of giving the thanks of a grateful nation. It will be even more striking, and this is something I think which will really test Donald Trump's patience, that one of the people giving the eulogy will be President Barack Obama, who beat John McCain in 2008. By no means has he had always a friendly relationship with McCain, but Obama will be back in that position of encapsulating a nation's thoughts and tributes to John McCain, and that's going to be something, given what we know about how much Trump despises Obama, that's going to be a very interesting political sort of tableau that is unfolding, and I think it will really test whether President Trump can avoid putting himself in probably you know, into this situation with a tweet or something like that. So that's something to watch.
Yeah, you can only imagine how President Trump will be feeling as that is broadcast right around the world when that service takes place. I want to go back to Nick for some of the reaction in the Middle East, because this self-styled maverick threw his weight behind rebels in some of the most complex conflicts in the Middle East. He, of course, visited Benghazi's Freedom Square while pushing for the US to get more involved in Libya in 2011. And he controversially posed alongside Syrian rebels 2 years later with the same call, a bigger role for the US in that war. And more recently, of course, he voted against blocking arms sale to Saudi Arabia. And obviously, many of our viewers will remember that just recently, CNN exclusively reported that a US-made bomb was used to kill innocent children in Yemen. Talk to us about John McCain's legacy in the Middle East.
Well, an absolute hawk on foreign policy, and there's no doubt in Tehran today that Senator McCain's passing means there's one less very vocal critic about them, and of course their involvement in Syria was one of those things that he also talked about. He was a supporter of President Trump reconsidering that President Obama's nuclear deal with Iran. He was a supporter behind the scenes on that. But his legacy there is going to be one, you know, that he had time to reflect on. He was an absolute hawk on going into Iraq, was one of the first to begin to talk about that in the early 2000s after 9/11, after US forces went into Afghanistan, where again he was robust on that issue. But he did did more recently reconsider what had happened in Iraq and say it was a mistake to go in, but he will be remembered and is being remembered. I mean, what we're hearing from the Saudi ambassador to Washington, who is a son of the king, brother to the crown prince, is that he was a trusted friend, that he was somebody who was a very good friend to Saudi Arabia, somebody whose judgment they could trust. An American hero is how the ambassador is describing him. So there's no shortage of praise from the United States allies, and of course there was praise not only from Israel's president over the weekend, but from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who called him a very strong and good friend for Israel. So I think the legacy in the Middle East is going to depend certainly on your perspective and where you stand.